Hi, you're watching Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone, and over the last week or so, Jordan Peterson has been in this neck of the woods here in New Zealand to deliver a series of public presentations. And as you can imagine, that's drawn out all sorts of critics out of the woodwork. He's like kryptonite, this guy, to certain ideologues, and they've all come out in force over the last week or so, and there's been just a slew of attack pieces that have been published about Peterson, but they are largely just very unintelligent. They're people who just look down their nose at Peterson and disdain anyone who happens to find merit in what he has to say about the world. I thought today I would respond to one of those pieces in particular. I could have responded to more, but I don't know if you'd want to be here for 4 or 5 hours as I did that, so I thought I would just pick one, and this particular one was by a lady called Verity Johnson. It was published in the New Zealand media on February the 21st, and it's called Why Jordan Peterson is a Sign of Our Very Scary Times. Dun, dun, dun. So let's get into it. This week, it seems that everyone has been called upon to have an opinion on Jordan Peterson. Well, no one's been called upon at all, but what happens in situations like these, let me break it down and give you the bigger context. Here comes a guy like Jordan Peterson who's offering some profoundly important truths that a lot of people find hugely important. And they are the truths that you can actually hang your hat on. If this was a bridge, he's offering people a bridge that's robust enough for you to step out on and sort of get yourself from a place of darkness, walk across that bridge and find something better. And so he offers something that's robust and it's sound and these profoundly important truths, but part of that is a critique of the ideologues that people like Verity Johnson and certain people, the minority ideologues in our society, cling so desperately to. And so he's seen as a threat. And so what happens is they all come out of the woodwork because they view him as a threat, and they've got to do everything in their power to try and destroy his reputation and hope like heck that somehow their dying minority ideology manages to thrive. It seems to me this is the only strategy they have left at this stage, because that's all we seem to hear nowadays. It's no mean feat, given that I, and I'm sure many of you, are still trying to understand what this grumpy bearded old dude actually stands for and why on earth he's so popular. Grumpy bearded old dude. Who's writing this? Verity, how old are you? I know you're young. I didn't even know who you were. Speaking of popularity, I had to actually go and Google and look up Verity Johnson to find out who she actually was. And she's just an opinionator. She just gets in the media and opines about things. It's like, hey, I'm Verity Johnson. I've got an opinion and here it is. And that's what she does. And so I didn't know who she was. I didn't know what her contribution to the world was until I went and looked her up. But I'm looking at this, and so I know you're young, Verity, but this is the kind of stuff that it seems to me that either someone who's like 13 or 14 or 15 would be writing. Maybe that's actually belittling to people who are 13, 14 and 15-year-olds. Maybe they wouldn't be doing this. Or someone who thinks they are being hip. You know, it might actually be that they need a hip replacement, that their ideology's that out of date. But they think they're being hip, but in actual fact, it's just tragic and embarrassing. I'm going to speak to the youths, and I'm going to use the old youth lingo. I know what the youths are into. Let's call this guy a grumpy, bearded old white dude. Oh, I destroyed him. It's so funny as well. But can you imagine what would happen if a young dude, to use your parlance, wrote something like this about, say, I don't know, Ellen DeGeneres? I don't get it. You know, I'm sure you with me, folks. Why is that dame so popular? Why is that broad? What's up with that Sheila? I don't think it would go down too well. And I'm sure people already can see the hypocrisy in the position that you've adopted here, or the way you've chosen to actually talk about Peterson. There is no denying he is popular, staggeringly popular, in fact, albeit largely among dudes. Oh my gosh, what is this? Can you imagine if someone wrote this about Ellen DeGeneres? You know, she came to New Zealand to do a speaking tour. Oh, there's no denying she's popular. She's staggeringly popular amongst the dames, amongst them broads, amongst the Sheilas. They'd be shot down in flames if a bloke wrote an op-ed piece and took this kind of tone. But I guess this is where we're at now. It was an veritable sausage fest on Monday night. I think, Verity, that actually might be an veritable grammar mistake there, because I think it should be it was a veritable sausage fest on Monday night. When I ran into his fans, again, who is writing this op-ed? This is the opening couple of sentences. we're really sort of plumbing the depths of intellectual profundity here, really, as you can tell. It was a veritable sausage fest on Monday night when I ran into his fans. It was like the feeding of the 5,000 30-something white men at his Auckland town hall talk. Imagine if a bloke wrote an article about the visit of, I don't know, Oprah Winfrey. It was like the feeding of the 5,000 50-something black women. Like, people would say, "What? Doesn't that sound a little racist to you? What are you doing there?" And so I'm going to say to you, Verity, what exactly are you doing here, Verity? Why are you drawing this form of racial profiling? Why? Is this an appeal to your ideological base? In actual fact, that a lot of people in your ideological base are quite racist now, and they look down on people who happen to be white and male, so they're racist sexists. Oh, those white males, oh, look at them losers, whitey, ooh, crackers. Is that what's going on here? Because it kind of seems like that might actually be going on here. Aside from the dudes, oh, the young dudes, what is going on here? There were 6 female partners. Well, I'm assuming that you're not lying here, that this is an attempt at some sort of humour and exaggeration, because obviously there was more than 6 females present. There were 6 female partners, 3 placard wavers, and 1 wizard in a natty black velvet cap and hat. Well, there you go. For a long time, I really struggled to understand this mass masculine appeal. Well, of course you did, Verity. And straight away I can understand why. It's because you're a woman. You're not going to get probably a bloke who is talking to other blokes. That's probably not going to appeal to you off the bat straight away. And secondly, you're probably not going to get it because of the ideological position that you hold, and which he regularly critiques. But again, this just doesn't really make any sense. To me, it would be like reading a young single guy writing an op-ed piece saying, "Oh, what's up with all those mummy bloggers? I don't get it. I don't get why so many mums are obsessed with mummy bloggers. What's up with that? What's wrong with them? Mummy bloggers are stupid." No, you don't get it because you're not a mum. Mummy bloggers are for mums. And so, it's not a world you're living in, and mummy bloggers are speaking to mothers, and so mothers get it. There's a connection there. Jordan Peterson is a bloke speaking to interested blokes, and so as a female, you're probably not going to get it. You're not going to understand necessarily or see the appeal in that, and that's fine, that's okay, because you're a female and you're in the world in a different way than I am as a male. And so we see the world differently. Different things will appeal to us, and that's all good. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So it's just kind of odd. I don't get the appeal, as if somehow you're meant to get it. And if you don't get it, somehow something's wrong here. That seems to be the insinuation anyway, that I take from a statement like that. I read his book, which is a messianic mixture of biology, biblical passages, and cosmopolitan-level life advice. Quite honestly, Verity, I'm not sure you actually were concentrating when you read his book, if you have actually read his book, if that is your summation of it. Especially that last bit, cosmopolitan-level life advice. Cosmopolitan. You are comparing what he offers to the childish, inane, and even deviant ramblings of Cosmopolitan, which is the most superficial nonsense you can read most of the time. This is a guy who's written a self-help book, quote unquote, whose core message could probably be summed up as, if you want to find meaning in life, you've got to be prepared to suffer. Now, next time you read something that deep and profound in the superficial pages of Cosmopolitan, then let us know. Usually they're offering advice on how you can best have anal sex. That tends to be the depth of what they've got on offer. Not particularly meaningful or helpful if you want to actually find human flourishing. There's the occasional heartwarming insight into the kind of man who falls deeper in love with his wife when seeing her exercising relentless kindness to an unloved toddler, but at its best, it's predictable platitudes for respectable living, and at its worst, reductive biological explanations for all human behaviour. Again, I'm not convinced you've actually read or maybe understood the book if that's how you're describing it. It wasn't exactly an earth-shattering read. Well, that's great, Verity, and I look forward to reading your book. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure it's going to be a good one, and clearly you are someone who has a grasp on the state of the world today and how best to offer meaning and hope to people in a very broken and confused culture that we now find ourselves living in the West. So I look forward to what you have to say. It's going to be a great read, I'm sure, and I'm sure it's going to sell millions and millions of copies, just like Peterson's book has. So please let us know when that's available. So I assumed my ovaries must be blocking some of the life-changing magic that the 14.4 million viewers on his infamous Channel 4 interview. Infamous. That's what you call stacking the deck, constructing the narrative, loading the field against the guy that you are supposed to be critiquing. I'm assuming you want to be seen as some sort of balanced and intelligent critique, but when you load up the verbiage in this way, his infamous channel, who's it infamous for? It's famous, that's for sure, and I guess some people on your side of the ideological spectrum who are sitting there are part of this now very much aging and dying minority ideological view of reality and of the world. That would be infamous for you, but again, this is all just intended to sort of stack the deck against the guy. There's nothing really balanced or fair about what you're doing here in this column. I guess it's understandable, though, because at the end of the day, what you're doing really here is you're preaching to the choir. You're playing to your base here. You've gathered around the fellow committed ideologues and you're saying, hey, folks, watch this. I'm going to have a crack at Peterson and you'll be clapping in just a minute. But you're not connecting with anyone outside of that group. Outside of the bubble, people aren't really interested. They understand and see what's going on here. I've been trying to work out all week where his appeal comes from, and the longer I thought about it, the more it started to scare me. Here comes the plot twist, folks. We've moved, and this is so typical of how people, it seems to me, approach Peterson now. These so-called intelligent and enlightened commentators, they really only have two modes. It's like playing a video game where they've only got two attack options, and their two modes of attacking the guy are, number one, childish, mindless ridicule, or childish, mindless hyperbole and scaremongering. This guy is going to be responsible for the next Holocaust. He's raising an army of white nationalists. He's raising an army of men who want to slaughter the womenfolk and rape them and make them into chattels again. That seems to be the only two options, and here we are, we've got both on display, which is probably why I chose this op-ed piece to critique. Firstly, his popularity comes undeniably from his messianic manner. Again, we're stacking the deck here. This is just loading the narrative. What she really means is, he's a cult leader. And we all know that we should be afraid of cult leaders, so you should be afraid of this guy. So far, you'll notice one thing that's interesting about this op-ed piece. She hasn't actually addressed any of the substance of his content. She's talked about it. She's ridiculed it. She's called him names. She's attacked those people who find merit in it, but she hasn't done the one essential thing that an intelligent and rational person should be doing in this situation. They should be actually addressing the substance of what he has to say, and she hasn't done that at all so far. He's stern, commanding, and likes to use very important language. So in other words, he's passionate, he's confident, and he is intelligent and educated enough that he has a grasp of the English language that's a lot broader than you're used to hearing, and so you think all of this is a bad thing. Not everyone who is passionate and who is able to speak with clarity and confidence and uses or has a wide grasp of language is Adolf Hitler giving speeches at a Nuremberg rally. That's a classic false dichotomy, but that seems to be sort of where you're going with this. If you did a shot every time he said post-structural Marxism, you'd be in a coma within 30 seconds. Yeah, he does use that word, but maybe have you stopped to consider that the reason he's using that word is because he's an intelligent man, he's a doctor of sorts, and he is prescribing a sickness or an illness, and he is using the correct technical terms to describe exactly what the illness is. Maybe that's what's going on here. Like, I don't know, to me this would be like someone saying, well, I went to the oncologist the other day and he told me all about my cancer. I'll tell you what, if I took a shot every time he said the words radiotherapy, I'd be an alcoholic, I'd be combed out on the floor, I'd be in a total stupor. So, Why is he using the word radiotherapy? Why is Jordan Peterson using the word post-structural Marxism? Do you understand what he means by that? And more importantly, is it true? Or is it false? Is he getting it right? It doesn't matter whether you understand it or whether you think it's a big word. That has no bearing on whether or not there's any merit in what he has to say. You can't listen to his 12 rules for order and not draw comparisons to the 10 commandments. So, what's the problem there? I don't get why that would be a problem. Doesn't that possibly mean that the 10 commandments also have some long-standing worldly wisdom? And if you want to live a full and flourishing human life, that maybe, we could learn something profoundly important from them, like, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not, covet thy neighbour's goods. Couldn't it be possible that thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's goods is actually a path to personal happiness and flourishing and a wider societal success for all of us and a deeper sense of community if we're not all sitting there in jealousy and envy at what everyone else has and are then tempted to just take it all off them by force? I mean, I don't know, I could be wrong, but it seems to me that there might be some prudent wisdom there, that the tone of this little op-ed and what you're saying here seems to be I don't know, implying that we shouldn't be listening to this. It's not exactly surprising he's popular then when religion was traditionally used to explain the wilderness of human existence. I would not describe the human existence as a wilderness. It certainly is for a lot of people today living in modern Western culture because they are now cut off from community and they are isolated and they are alone. They're effectively lost in a wilderness without one of the most essential and important things that you need in your life, which is other human persons that you have a meaningful connection and self-interest in, and therefore are able to give yourself to in self-giving love. It's so profoundly important, community. And so for a lot of people, human existence today is a wilderness, but traditionally it hasn't been a wilderness at all. And I would not describe it that way. Traditionally, if you get the further back you go, often the greater sense of meaning there was within the human existence. So it's such a strange turn of phrase. In the climate of modern what's the point of it all confusion, Peterson's godly gravitas is both certain and soothing. But maybe that's the very point, Verity. Have you ever stopped to consider that the reason Peterson is so popular, you've asked the question, is precisely because there is very little meaning for people in the world today, that modern ideology is actually soul-destroying. It's not helping us. It's not helping individuals to find human flourishing, and it's not helping societies to flourish. It's just driving us further apart. Maybe that's the point. And so when Jordan Peterson turns up and says, hey, maybe there's a better way of doing this, and he grounds it in things like virtue and the willingness to live a self-sacrificial kind of life and to order your life around truth and goodness and beauty and things like that, maybe the reason he's so popular is because there's something profoundly good and true and beautiful about what he actually has to offer. Now, I'm not saying Peterson is Jesus. He doesn't have everything right. He's not perfect. He doesn't have all the answers to all of life's problems. But the point is that there is enough that is commendable about what Peterson is saying for him to be, I think, worthy of our notice and worthy of actually taking an interest in and even learning from. There's a reason guys especially find it appealing, though. We've come a long way in pulling down stubborn, sexist societal tropes, but there's still a large gap in how we're teaching boys to be good men. Well, that's fascinating because I would argue we're not even attempting to do that at the moment. We're not even close. And it's interesting that you would even say we. In reality, masculinity is something that can only be taught by the masculine. It's that simple. If you're a bloke and you don't have good men in your life, and the first and foremost of those good men should be your father, and if you don't have that presence, and if you haven't got that presence, you haven't got other good men in your life who are actually modelling and actively teaching you, and not just in what they do, but in their words as well, about how to live out an authentic and robust and healthy masculinity, then you're not going to get it. And no amount of womansplaining is actually going to get you there either. And this is one of the tendencies that I'm seeing now more and more from that sort of more militant feminist wing, is the attempt to try and act as if they can father men into healthy masculinity, as if they can sit there and lecture men about how they should be men in the world. That's just not going to work. And what we actually need is a genuine engagement with men, which comes from the first and most and profoundly important starting point that masculinity is actually a good thing. It's not a curse, it's not a blight, and it is not responsible for the majority of or all of the evils in the world. In actual fact, masculinity needs to be celebrated, and we need to encourage men more to live out masculinity, and that's how you end up with good men. Most of the guys I've spoken to say they're confused about how to be a man these days. Bingo! And that there is one of your money quotes, Verity, and you should be stopping to think about and think deeply about what you've just written there. If you weren't in such a hurry to be in this sort of tirade of angst and anger and upset and ridicule against Jordan Peterson, you'd possibly be stopping to think about just how important that statement is that you've just written and why that matters so much. Listen to what you're saying. Many of the guys I've spoken to say they're confused about how to be a man these days. Don't you get it? That should be ringing alarm bells, Verity. That's something really, really serious. There are only two biological sexes, and we desperately need the complementarity between both of them. And we need that complementarity, that male and female difference, to be healthy and flourishing for both males and females. And we need that complementarity to be thriving. And we need that in order to have good, stable, civil society. And so when you've got one of your only two biological sexes, the other, the 50% essential component of stable civil order, and the majority of people you're saying to in that group, you're speaking to in that group, are saying they don't understand how to be a man these days, that should be ringing alarm bells. And I'm pretty sure it would be if it was the other way around, as if there was a whole lot of females just saying, I don't understand femininity and I don't understand anything about being a female today. By the way, that's one of the reasons why this year on the channel I've made a very conscious decision that I'm going to be producing content that is focused, some content and regular content, that is focused more specifically on men. And I say that as someone who I consider myself to be in a very privileged position. I'm a guy who's in his 40s now. I have a stable, loving marriage, and it takes effort and work to maintain that. But I'm in that position, and a lot of guys I know aren't. I'm also a guy who's a father. I've got 4 daughters and 1 son. And I was also blessed with a really good. My dad wasn't anything earth-shattering. He, the greatest athlete that ever lived. He had all sorts of struggles and things in his life, but my dad was a genuinely good man, and I learnt a lot, and I was taught a lot by my father. And I grew up in a stable, loving home with mum and dad present until my father died, January of 2018. And so for me, I think I have an obligation to offer men something of the benefits of what I've found in my life by living out an authentic and robust masculinity, because it's a very life-giving thing. And the reason I have that sense of obligation is because, well, I have an audience here, and also, secondly, because I look around the world, and interestingly enough, I heard Jordan Peterson actually saying something similar in another interview that he gave to a journalist here in New Zealand, that when he looks around the world and he hears these stories from men who approach him and tell him about how his book effectively saved their life and got them out of all sorts of darkness and mess, that he has a sense of brokenness and hurt and woundedness about that. He sees that it shouldn't be this way. And I agree, there's so many broken men out there, and I do a lot of work. I'm often speaking on issues of masculinity to men, and often young men, and I see what it is that a lot of young men are now struggling with and contending with. And I think that I feel a sense of obligation that if I've been privileged enough to have something good that has helped me to flourish, then why shouldn't I share that with other men as well to enable them to flourish? Because it just seems very few people are doing that. There's plenty of people, there's no shortage of people like Verity Johnson and co. who want to sit there and critique men, tell them how bad they are, and blame them for most of the problems in the world. But damn it, it ain't doing anything helpful, and a lot of it is just twaddle. It's just ideological garbage. It's not even grounded in reality. It's just screaming at it. You've constructed this big straw man that you call masculinity, and you scream at it and howl at it, on a regular basis. And it's not helping, and a lot of it's not even true. This big disorientating gap in young men's understanding makes it easy for Peterson to step firmly in and say, I have the answers. And if the scale of his popularity is anything to go by, there are an alarming amount of lost men out there. Again, Verity, are you stopping to think about what you are actually writing here and how profoundly important that actually is? You're admitting here that there is a major crisis. You've just discovered the very answer to the first question you asked. Why is this guy so popular? I don't get it. If you stop to think about your own words, you'd realize you've just written down the answer to it. Because there is a broken and lost culture. The Lost Boys is a very real cultural phenomenon. And it's affecting a lot of young men, and not just young men, but even older men out there who are struggling to understand what it is to live out an authentic and robust masculinity. Like I said, there's no shortage of people out there willing to critique, to lecture, and to abuse and accuse them of all sorts of things. But there are very few people genuinely offering a helping hand. And Peterson is one of those people who's actually genuinely done that. What men need, and particularly young men need, is they need good men who are willing to be like spiritual fathers, if you like, to those men. They obviously can't be their biological fathers, but they can certainly offer a form of fatherhood, which is something so essential that lies at the heart of authentic masculinity. But it's so very important for our society right now that more men step up and do that. But here you are answering your own question. Peterson is popular because the need is so huge. The brokenness is real and it's huge. And Peterson isn't just offering trite ideological nonsense. There's a reason why these young men are not turning to your side of the philosophical divide, if you like. It's because they've looked at what you're offering and they are seeing it and they're saying, A, these people don't seem to even respect me as a man, and B, what they are saying doesn't offer anything life-giving, so why would I buy into that? And so they're looking elsewhere. And maybe the reason why Peterson is so popular is not because he's some weird cult leader like you think he is, who's found a group of vulnerable people to manipulate, which is what you seem to be suggesting here. But in actual fact, he's offering some profoundly important truths, and a majority of men are recognizing, and they're saying, because instinctively this is what happens. When you see something good, true, and beautiful, instinctively you know it as such, and you are drawn to it. And that's possibly what's actually going on here. But it seems that you're not even willing to countenance that idea because you've already decided and you've made up your mind with very little. Again, you haven't actually critiqued what the guy is saying. You haven't pulled apart anything. You haven't even presented to us anything in any robust way about what he actually is proposing here. You're just sitting in this very superficial, shallow, and even childish critical critique mode that is really all about defending your ideological position and playing to your base. This is worrying in itself, and downright alarming that this group turns to Peterson as a prophet when so many of his arguments are dangerously one-sided. What do you mean? You haven't even presented here a single one of those arguments that you're claiming are dangerously one-sided. What are they? This op-ed is basically one long ad hominem attack. You're just calling him name after name after name. You're making insinuation after insinuation after insinuation. But there's no substance. What one-sided arguments are you talking about? Present one of his arguments and respond to it. Where the heck is it? Where is it? But the scariest part is when you realize how these guys turn to the internet for guidance and what these men may then be exposed to through his videos. What does that even mean? As if the book isn't bad enough, and as if it wasn't bad enough that they're going to hear the man speak in person, they can also hear him speaking and sharing his ideas on the magic interweb machine, and that's even more dangerous. The sorcery becomes more powerful on YouTube. What does that even mean? I don't get why. Why is this suddenly worse? That they're going to be, even more exposed to more of his ideas? What's the issue here? I think this, again, as we'll see in just a second, was just a very unintelligent, when you stop to think about how meaningless that actually is, that last statement. This was an unintelligent segue trying to get you to another straw man claim that you want to make, because you want to then start talking about, as you're about to, about the dangerous subcultures on the internet. And what you want to do is you desperately want to tie Jordan Peterson to that. And so you've made this really unintelligent comment about how suddenly he becomes more dangerous when he's in video form on the YouTubes. Oh, the power, the dark magic becomes more sorcerous and evil on the interweb. See, the last part of Peterson's appeal is his ability to play upon men's sense of victimization. One of his favourite lines is that men have never been an advantaged group in society. In fact, he says they are actively disadvantaged today. Well, firstly, he's right, and he clarifies this all the time. Men have never been an advantaged group. They haven't. Being a male does not mean that you are automatically in the privileged class. That's the whole point. What Peterson is very clear to say is that a very small minority of men have held power and privilege over all women and almost all men as well. That's the point here. And this is where this whole critique of cultural Marxism is so fundamentally important. And this is the missing component that you don't seem to understand, because it's about this Marxist tendency to construct all of history and the world through this lens of victim versus oppressor. So you have an oppressor class and an oppressed class, and you have to have revolutions to overthrow the oppressed, have to overthrow the oppressor class. Now, there are situations where you have oppressed peoples and an oppressor class, but there's a real problem when you're wrongly diagnosing who the oppressor class is, and you're accusing whole swathes of people just by virtue of their biology of being part of an oppressor class that they haven't actually been part of for most of human history. That's a problem. That's a real problem. Secondly, there's a really big problem when you set up the relationship between males and females in this completely dangerous and very false way, where you're suggesting that it's about a power struggle and that male-female relationships are about power, and that female empowerment is actually about seizing power, and it's all of the men who have got the power, and so we must view them effectively from this position of oppressor, oppressed. And what is an oppressor? They are your enemy. This does untold and has done untold harm to Western society. There are things that the original feminists, and I'm going back a long time here, but the original feminists were making valid critiques about the way things were happening in society. But then what happens is it starts to morph and change, and you get this sort of militant third wave feminism that rides in on the back of this, and all of a sudden there's the whole trend towards cultural revolution, which is very much grounded in the Marxism that was popular through the 50s and 60s and really came to the fore around that time, and that starts to inform all sorts of things, and in particular here the way the relationship between men and women is viewed. And that is a big problem. So, yeah, he's right in that regard. And secondly, he says they're actively disadvantaged today. Well, you don't have to believe him, Verity. Just go and look at the data. In fact, just go and look at the data for our country, New Zealand, which is, by all accounts, is a pretty good country. We live at peace. You know, we're not at war. We have a relatively stable economy. We don't tend to have these huge extremes. And yet, even in our society, go and look at the indicators for health and well-being and things like education, and just look at those honestly and look at that data honestly and tell yourself whether you think Peterson might actually have something of merit to say here when he talks about the fact that men today now do find themselves in a disadvantaged position. And then when you think about, on top of that, there's a whole layer of popular culture that very much is found in the mainstream media and popular commentary, exactly like this, which tends to look down upon and disdain and to speak very badly about masculinity itself and masculinity in general. And maybe, just maybe, Peterson's actually onto something here, that what he's saying is not some weird, odd, freakish conspiracy designed to manipulate a vulnerable group, but actually he's highlighting something profoundly true and important here, but for whatever reason, you don't want to admit to the fact that maybe he's actually onto something. This is catnip to the middle-aged and enraged brigade. Yeah, and bingo, that tells me that you don't want to acknowledge it. That's that very statement there. Led by supreme snowflake Piers Morgan, who jumps at the chance to retweet proof that men are under attack. Well, no offence to you, but Piers Morgan is not a leader of anything. He's just a bloke who tweets things, and often he just says some really crazy and outrageous things. Sometimes he also says some things that are good and true as well. Just like you, Verity. Just like me. I often say things that are flat out wrong. I often say things that are outrageous and absurd. But I often also say things that are good and true. This is human nature. This is the human condition. But Piers Morgan is not a leader of anything, and he doesn't represent Peterson. He's not his PR man. He didn't write anything that Peterson has published. So this is just, again, this, you craft this ad hominem straw man. Let's try and tie Jordan Peterson to Piers Morgan and any of the crazy things Piers Morgan's done. This is just irrational. And also to the much more sinister manosphere, which is a nasty, murky internet subculture based loosely on the belief that modern society favours women and oppresses men. Again, the manosphere, if you want to call it that, has nothing to do with Peterson. And this is exactly what you've done. You've just done it with Piers Morgan, and now you're trying to tie him to the manosphere. And as I said previously, that's before, earlier on, that's why you did that thing before, that little sleight of hand, where you tried to introduce the idea that Peterson is worse on the internet. Because you're trying to tie him unfairly to things that he's got nothing to do with. And boy, do they love Peterson. Have you ever wondered why all of his 1.5 million view lecture videos are titled by what sounds like a douchey 19-year-old? Quote unquote, Jordan Peterson explains why nice guys finish last. Well, to be fair, I'm not sure that would be actually something that would qualify as a douchey 19-year-old quote. To me, that seems like possibly just a clever way of trying to invite people in. It's not quite clickbait, but it's a clever way of trying to invite people into watching the video by giving your title a bit of creative flair. I don't think I'd necessarily call that a douchey 19-year-old thing to say. But then she says this, or Jordan Peterson destroys feminists. Now, I agree with you here. Here's something good and true that you've just said, Verity. I hate those articles and videos. Bob destroys Sarah. Sarah destroys triathletes. Triathletes destroy people who like Weet-Bix. Like, these destroys titles are so stupid and dumb, and the sooner they die, the better. The sooner we stop using them, the better. Yeah, that does sound like something a douchey 19-year-old might say, but then I've also got to ask myself the question, would a douchey 19-year-old write something like, why Jordan Peterson is a sign of our very scary times? Isn't it possible? Or it would be constantly talking about the white dudes and the grumpy bearded old dude. Isn't that something that a douchey 19-year-old would say? I mean, no offense, but if we're going to be fair in these assessments, isn't that also fair? But I do tend to agree with you. You're absolutely right. The destroys phenomenon, it's got to die. But here's the thing. In actual fact, not all of his, widely viewed videos have titles like that. And that's got nothing to do with Peterson. Peterson is not out there promoting himself in that way. That is typical internet culture. And Verity, you're a young woman, so I'm assuming that you understand this and you're just being a little bit disingenuous here. Because you would know that people do this on the internet. They take other people's work, they reword it, they retitle it, and it's literally clickbaity. And by the way, in actual fact, I'm pretty confident that a lot of the publications that you would be happy to be published in, so the BuzzFeed type publications out there, they are notorious for doing exactly this. Verity Johnson destroys Jordan Peterson. And I'm pretty confident that you wouldn't have too much of a problem being published by those types of places if they were going to republish something like this. And even if they were going to give it a title like that, I don't know if you'd be too worried by that. So I think this is a little bit disingenuous on your part. It's because these videos are enthusiastically posted by the soft manosphere. So now we've got two layers of manosphere. We've got the hard, outer, dark regions of the manosphere, and then we've got the soft Milky Way of the manosphere, where they're not quite as evil as the dark manosphere, but they still have manosphere about them, and we all know about the evil of the manosphere. It'd be great if you could just give us some more clarifying terms here and just define exactly what you mean here, because it's very easy, and this is so typical. This is the sort of thing that feeds witch hunts, when people just throw out this sort of hyperbole, and they throw it out there and they don't clarify exactly what they mean. And what happens is any subject can subjectively apply their own interpretation to what you mean. And it doesn't help. It's not rational. It's not intelligent. It's not really clarifying exactly what the cause is here and what the cure is going to be. And it tends to just create a catch-all type thing. And these types of things, they tend to lead to this unthinking witch hunt mentality. People who aren't, they sort of effectively, they self-medicate by doing things like this, and they get to reassure themselves, oh yes, that's the manosphere. It's like people used to say with PC culture. It used to be a bit of a throwaway thing that people, anytime they didn't really want to engage in an articulate way with a particular idea, they just say, oh, that's part of PC culture. And it was a way of not really thinking too deeply about issues. I'd argue that's exactly what you're doing here, Verity as well. But I digress. Back to the topic at hand. It's because these videos are enthusiastically posted by the soft manosphere who love to use Peterson as the heavyweight proof, quote unquote, scare quotes. They need that men really are victimized. No, you don't need to use Peterson. And by the way, Peterson is not just some random dude with a tinfoil hat on who's making up strange ideas out of nowhere. And this is why I'm not sure if you are actually reading and understanding and listening to what he's actually saying, because it's not uncommon for him to refer to actual hard data, not data that he's had anything to do with, just surveys, statistics, scientific findings, and facts. So if you've got a guy who is telling you things that are true, it's kind of odd to say, well, I don't like him, and he's a dangerous guy, so his proof, quote unquote, goes in scare quotes, and we shouldn't be listening to it, and he can't be right that men are really victimized. Go and look at the data. Just have a look at the data. And I don't know if Peterson would take seriously your idea here, or suggestion that he's claiming that men are victimized. I think it's, in actual fact, he's talking in a much more precise way about the fact that men now find themselves in a culture which is not helping, is actually doing harm to their ability to flourish, and that's not a good thing. And I would argue there is a difference there. It might seem like semantics to you, but I think it's a very important difference, even if you think it might be irrelevant, because to be victimized, I think, implies something about the position of power that men find them in and themselves in, or what might actually be going, like someone's being deliberately targeted here. I think this is a much bigger problem than that. It's a whole culture, a whole set of philosophies and ideologies that we've bought into that are now actually causing harm in and of themselves, even if no one is directly victimizing another person. It's hard to tell whether Peterson tries to appeal to this group. Well, he has on so many occasions said that he is deliberately not trying to appeal to this group, that it's completely dishonest of you to even put this in there, unless you're not doing your research. He's very particular about his word choice, and he deliberately uses the exact flashpoint phrases of the manosphere around liberalism/feminism/gender determinism. Again, it would be really great if you could actually define for us, Verity, what the manosphere is and what this lexicon of the manosphere is, because I don't know what it is. I don't understand what I sort of get what you're saying when you talk about the manosphere, but I don't understand what these flashpoint phrases are that you're referring to. You haven't explained that. And I'd also love to actually hear you citing some concrete examples of Peterson using them as well. That would be great. So those three things together would actually contribute to an intelligent critique of the man, but we didn't get that. Again, it's just all ad hominem and hyperbole. But he's also too sensible and too interested in the idea of personal responsibility to align with a group that argues everything from woman being the root of all men's problems to the incel ideology of killing women who refuse sex with you. And bingo, that is your money quote right there. So listen to how you start this paragraph. It's hard to tell whether Peterson tries to appeal to this group. So you phrase the question, I don't know, is he appealing to this group? And then you end by saying, well, he's too sensible, too interested in the idea of personal responsibility to align himself with the group that argues in these ways and represents these positions. So in other words, no, he doesn't. So why did you even raise that as a question? I know you raised that as a question because you're trying to demonize the guy. That's what you're trying to do. All you have to do is sow doubt. What you've just done there in that paragraph just speaks volumes about someone who is just invested in defending the ideology for the sake of defending the ideology. They're not really interested in the truth. They're not really interested in delving too deeply. And possibly they don't realize they have to do that because they don't see the seriousness of the problem. They're living in a bubble. They're very medicated against the reality of life. They've got enough economic well-being to actually medicate themselves and insulate themselves against a lot of this stuff, so they don't realize how much of an issue a lot of this actually is for people out there. However, this doesn't stop his videos becoming a gateway. Ooh, the gateway drug. So if you can't actually find a legitimate cause here, what you do is you carefully recraft a slippery slope in a logical fallacy, and you don't call it that, you call it a gateway. This is the gateway. Now, sometimes things can be a gateway to other things, but in this case, No. However, this doesn't stop his videos becoming a gateway to pulling lonely, vulnerable men into the manosphere. Again, it would be great if you could actually explain more about what you mean by the manosphere. Give it some boundaries, some clarity, because you're talking about it like it's a community or a place that people go to. Clearly, you're talking about it like it's a set of ideological principles. So what are those principles? Just explain them so we can understand what you mean when you use that word. And given our track record with mental health and loneliness and the backdrop of increasingly polarized, entrenched online gender warfare, you can't help but find his massive appeal a sign of very scary times. Why? Why? Why is it not equally true that you can't actually look at his mass appeal and recognize a couple of important truths here? Number one is that there is a lot of broken men out there, and our culture is in a confused and very difficult and dangerous place right now because of this brokenness. And so there is actually a genuine need. This is not people making stuff up. This is not just a pathology. These people are not just mentally ill. There's genuine need out there. The confusion is real. Like you've even said it, loneliness. That's not just a sense that people have that's wrong. If I change their mind, they'll realize they're not lonely. People are lonely and they feel isolated and disconnected precisely because most of the time in our society, they are lonely, isolated and disconnected. That's the problem. So you're trying to, cure the symptom without actually curing the disease. You don't even want to acknowledge there's a disease there. But maybe isn't it possible that in actual fact, so first of all, Jordan is speaking to a very, very real need. And secondly, that the reason he's so popular is because unlike your ideology, he actually offers something of substance. There is something good, true, and beautiful here. Now, he doesn't have all the answers, sure, and the guy's not a messiah, and he's not right about everything. But the fact is, he has enough that is good about what he says to be commendable, and for people to actually find meaning in that. And a lot of what he says is profoundly good and true about living a good and virtuous life, where you embrace responsibility, where you embrace suffering. These are actually good and time-tested truths that really do matter, and they mean a lot. And it seems to me that you're not quite clicking here with how serious this problem has got. So here in New Zealand, even if you look at our suicide data, we've known for a long time anyway, this is not uncommon, that usually more than 2/3 of suicides are males. And we've always known that the 40 to sort of 45 age bracket, or we've known for a long time that the 40 to 45 age bracket is a danger zone. It's a hotspot for suicide. And that makes sense. It's the midlife crisis. For what happens with men is all of a sudden you realize, you wake up one morning and you start to realize, or maybe you don't realize it, but something starts gnawing away at you. And what it is it's the fact that, the Grim Reaper is getting closer than what he was before. All of a sudden you realize that your funeral day is a lot closer now than your birthday was. And so all of a sudden you start thinking about your own mortality. And for a lot of guys who don't have anything deeper, they don't have community around them, they don't have anything to actually ground their life in a deeper sense of meaning, they literally fall off the planet. And they fall into such a state of brokenness and despair that they are willing to take their own life because they don't see any hope in the midst of that. And so it's not unsurprising to see that tragedy unfolding in the 40 to sort of 45 age bracket. But a couple of years ago in New Zealand, what we also identified is that there is a new danger hotspot for young men. And that danger zone for youth suicide is young men aged 20 to 25. Now that is insane. That is absolutely insane. Something has gone terribly wrong in your culture when young men aged 20 to 25 are now a major risk group for suicide. Something has gone terribly wrong, and you should be sitting up and taking notice about that fact. When I was 20 to 25, I was 10 foot tall. I thought I was bulletproof. I wasn't, but I thought I was the best looking guy in the room. And every time I walked into a party, I thought every girl wanted to marry me. Now, I was wrong, but I believe that because that's what's supposed to be happening in your life at the age of 20 to 25 when you're a bloke. You should not be in a danger zone for suicide. That means that you've got 20 to 25-year-old males who are looking at the world and they are now in such a state of despair and isolation and disconnection that they believe the only way out is to end their own life. Something is seriously dysfunctional in our society for men when we've got to that point. And it makes me both angry and upset, and I guess really sad in Verity that you can't even acknowledge that basic fact, that you seem totally unwilling to do this, and instead you're sitting here playing to the ideological crowd. Can I suggest that possibly a better thing to do would be to actually start from a place of compassion, start from a place of listening, and to do that you've got to start with humility. Maybe you don't have all the answers to everything. I know I don't. I don't have all the answers to everything. And humility is absolutely essential. And it's one thing that is so lacking in our culture today, especially in the mainstream media commentary sphere and in the online social media sphere. It's all about ego, self-aggrandizement. It's all about me and my self-gratification. And it's all about, there's so much narcissism. So many people who are wandering around, and this used to be me a couple of years ago, who think that they had all the answers and their voice was so important on every issue that everyone had to hear their view on everything that happened in the world. We don't. It's quite conceivable, Verity, that just like me, you don't know everything about everything. It's quite conceivable, Verity, that you're not seeing the bigger picture. It's quite conceivable, Verity, that you may even be ideologically blinded. It's quite conceivable, Verity, that in actual fact, Peterson, what he's doing is profoundly good because he's responding to a profoundly important need in our society, even if he doesn't get everything right. But in order to understand that and to begin to accept that, you've got to start from a place of humility and an acceptance that maybe there's more to this world, there's more to learn than you actually know. And I would suggest if you could start from that place and you could begin to actually look more compassionately and more honestly at the landscape, you would see a very, very different picture, and you would realize that it's not this false dichotomy you're trying to create, that somehow, all the good guys are on your side and everyone who finds merit in Peterson is clearly some sort of weird guy who wants to kill women who don't have sex with them. That's not the only two options on the table here, Verity, but you've confined yourself to that. You've created a straw man here, and you've just created one big, large, insulting and unintelligent ad hominem attack that doesn't address anything of substance. Maybe there's a third way here. Maybe the third way is that in actual fact there is a very serious need here. Peterson is responding to it, and in actual fact the vast majority of people who find merit in what Peterson has to offer are not joining the incel community. That in actual fact, they are people who are discovering profoundly important truths. They are discovering profoundly important goods. They are discovering something that is good, true, and beautiful that is actually helping them to reshape their lives, to flourish, and to become more responsible and loving, compassionate members of the societies, the families, the communities in which they live. Maybe that's what's actually going on here. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comment section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please consider financially supporting the channel. The link for how you can do that is found in the video description below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.